as we so yes, she's also started the recording, and the recording of this event will be up on our website after this event. We've got Andy Horsnell as well, who is the executive director for the Center for Local Prosperity. I want to give just a quick elevator pitch on Center for Local Prosperity. We're in our 11th year. We operate across the 4 Atlantic Canadian provinces. And I think if we were going to put it on a bumper sticker, what we do is we help small local and rural communities gain more control and agency over their future, particularly in the era of globalization. So that includes things like investment, food, energy, and in this case, cooperation around different business ventures. That's what we're going to talk about today. This is a 1-hour lunch and learn. It's going to be a little bit fast and furious. There could be question and answer time towards the end. This is the 3rd one in our series. The first one in March featured Michael Schumann, a well-known across North America local investment expert. And he actually cited during that talk the importance of cooperatives as a way to really build momentum, strength within a community to really push back against a lot of corporate aggregation that we're seeing in our day and age. And then even last month, we talked about local investment, particularly around the idea of CDIFs. We had FarmWorks and 2 of their clients, and that's an investor co-op as well. So that cooperative theme has been running through this whole webinar series. And as I looked into it, I began to realize in Atlantic Canada, it's incredibly deep and rich history around cooperatives. Very first one, believe it or not, Red Bay, Labrador in 1895. Some 18, 19 people got together and they founded a store as a cooperative. Some of you may have heard about the Antigonish movement with Moses Cody, Jimmy Tompkins. There was a huge flurry across the region really in the 20s and 30s. Again, it's all based out of need. And I like the phrase that necessity is the mother of invention. And that's when we see a lot of co-ops start to pop up and flourish. And there's a lot of different types. Supplier co-ops, worker co-ops, producer, consumer, housing, childcare, investment, a lot of different types of cooperatives. And we're going to be touching in on some of those today. We've got a great slate of people to bring into this for the next hour. I want to introduce Angela Gaudet. She is with the Tignish Fisheries Co-op and their processing commercial arm called the Royal Star Foods. They were founded in 1925, and they currently represent 230 fishers. And Angela, congratulations. This is going to be your 50th year with the co-op coming up this summer. That's fantastic. And actually, you're the 2nd generation in this co-op. Your father was one of the founding members. So that's great. We've also got Joey Pittoello with JustUs Coffee. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with JustUs Coffee. It was founded in 1995. And if I'm correct, there's 17 worker members in that co-op. And a great slate of products, I've got to say, branching into teas and chocolate and all kinds of things. And then finally, we've got Kristen Murray. She is the Co-op Development Officer for the Newfoundland-Labrador Federation of Co-ops. So she's representing now really an umbrella organization of the cooperative movement across Newfoundland-Labrador. And as I understand it, you're in your 76th year representing some 70 co-ops. And amazing statistic is that 20% of the population of Newfoundland is involved in a co-op of some type. So we've got a great slate here, and I want to kick it off maybe with just some questions for all 3 of you. Tell us a little bit about how the co-op gets involved in the community, the importance of that community involvement, and what it does for the local economy. So anyone, three of you could jump in. Feel free. There's no particular order here. All right, Angela, you tell us how the Tignish Co-op and Royal Star, its importance in the local economy, particularly in that part of PEI, but then how it reaches out across the whole island and even.
Well, Tignish Fisheries Co-op, we'd be the largest co-op, I'm sure, on Prince Edward Island. And we're the biggest employer in our area. So a lot of the people in the community in the West Prince area rely on the fisheries co-op for their employment. And that would involve the fishers who sell their product here, the employees who process that product here, and the local co-op store, the Tignish branch of the Provincial Credit Union. There's another branch of the credit union in Alberton. So all these people are very reliant on the success of our co-op. They're very supportive. We take a very active role in responsibility toward giving to local charities and helping people whenever we can. Our employees are great at that also, always contributing to the food banks and all these things. So I think for the most part, we're part of that community, a very big player in that community, and take a lot of pride in that.
So locally owned, and a lot of that economic activity happens within the region. So you're able to capture the local wealth, so to speak.
That's
and
right.
working in the community.
Yeah.
And I think that's really one of the shining stars around the cooperatives. Joey, we talked earlier about your cooperative, but then you work with other cooperatives, even internationally. So there's a whole international network there.
Yeah, and sorry, my Zoom just cut out as you were asking the question previously, but I'm back in. But as far as community is concerned, for us, I think we're a worker co-op, so obviously our employees are members of our community, and about 50% of our total employee count are members. But as you say, we're also our business model kind of relies on a fairly broader community, global community, very much rooted in Latin American countries, but also some African co-ops we've been buying from for years and years, particularly in Ethiopia, and then also in Indonesia, particularly the island of Sumatra. We've been buying coffee from for a long while. So for us, yeah, I guess our sense of community extends right from, our back door here in Grand Pré, in Wolfville, all the way to where the producer co-ops that we're buying from. And this is the key piece for us, is that the value chain includes co-ops from the production level all the way, in the best case scenario, to even a consumer co-op at the end of the retail chain, I guess. So, and I think too, as members, as far as community involvement and engagement and how our co-op connects to that, we also have a sister co-op, an investment co-op. It's a community investors that have invested in this business over the years. Um, and also as worker members of our worker co-op, a lot of those members, we encourage them to engage in their own kind of community interests. And in a lot of ways, that's how we find ourselves in sponsorships and donations and supporting, members minor hockey, or in some cases the community oven here in Wolfville is an interest of a couple other worker members, and so some sponsorship goes that way. So living in the community and owning the business at the same time allows for that kind of engagement at that grassroots level, which is pretty fulfilling for a number of us here.
That's great. And you mentioned Wolfville, and of course, I noticed we've got Kelly Murray, speaking of another local co-op with the Wolfville Farmers Market. Glad you could join us this morning, or this afternoon, actually, now it is. Kristen, you've got as the co-op development officer for the Federation in Newfoundland-Labrador, you've got your pulse on much of the activity across the province there. How important is the co-op movement for the Newfoundland-Labrador economy?
Hi, everyone. So I think as you were saying earlier, Robert, we have definitely a deep history of not only co-ops but unions in the province and adjacent types of structures. And I do think that I agree with you in saying that co-ops come out of dire need. They come out of necessity, but I think they also come out of aspiration and dreams of the future as well. So want to, I guess, shed some light on some stories that I think speak to either in our community here. So yeah, I think some of them that come to mind for me are the Growing Our Futures Childcare Co-op on the west coast of the island here. They started from another co-op. So the other co-op was the credit union, and people of their staff and community around them recognized that they did not have enough supply of childcare spaces in their community, and the credit unions partnered very intentionally with other businesses and other community organizations, and basically, initiated the existence of this new childcare co-op. And after a few years of it, operating, they basically completely, let it kind of stand on its own, its own two legs, which is a nice analogy. And still support it to this day and support the birth of other childcare co-ops around the province. So I think that's a beautiful example right there, giving it back into the hands of the people that need it in the first place. And speaking of community, I think we need to talk about communities of people. So community can be a group of people that just have a related background or need that binds them together. So another great example of that in our province is the Social Justice Cooperative. So it's pretty unusual to have a co-op started of just people who want to help the world, the universe. I don't know, it's just they're interesting. Like I don't know how many other co-ops are structured in such a way. It's basically just a group of advocates, activists, however they self-identify, and they create pods of working groups and action teams to address different issues. So it's varied, and it ebbs and flows as things go on in our world. But I think it just shows, and they have, I believe, around 200 members. So it just shows that, even just the idea of wanting to come together to solve issues can create a co-op, and it doesn't need to be around and it does come from a need, but then it can kind of grow from there. So they've kind of shown that to us, and that's a very important co-op in our community for sure. So those are just some two examples to get us started.
Well, that's fascinating. One co-op giving birth to another one, so to speak, and then social justice. It strikes me that co-ops could form really around anything where there's a need, and people getting together and seeing the need and figuring out that this is one of the best ways to address it. That's fantastic. I want to get a little bit, feel free to put your questions in the chat box, by the way. We will have time to be getting to those soon. I do want to get a little bit into the nuts and bolts of co-ops. You'd mentioned, Kristen, one of the credit union giving birth to the daycare co-op. And maybe a little bit about how are co-ops formed today? What kind of educational process is required with the public or with a group that is looking to form one? We talked a little bit about the culture of co-ops is different than, say, the corporate world or the kind of the regular business world. So Kristen or Angela, Joey, any thoughts about that?
I guess from a practical angle first, you do need at least 3 people. You do need a strong sense of why it is you're coming together in the first place. You absolutely need expert advice. And if you don't, or if none of those folks are co-op experts, and it's very rare, you want to come to an organization like ourselves or like co-op zone who can help you get them started and know what the process is to legally incorporate. You absolutely need a good business sense. In terms of, even if you're not going to create a venture that is going to generate a lot of surplus, you still need to be able to cover your expenses, and registrars, regulators, as well as lenders and funders and partners want to see that you understand that, you know, how you're going to cover your expenses. You certainly do not need to come up with a venture that's going to generate tons and tons of profit. That's actually would be a red flag, I think, maybe. It's more, how are you going to serve your purpose and the means to get there? So that's kind of the practical steps that you would take. You need that group, you need that expert advice, and you need to get incorporated and understand what your operations are going to look like to be a successful venture. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in here, but I can
Yep.
I can pass the mic. Yeah.
I'd just say too, and I was mentioning this the other day when we get together, I think one of the, we call it education, call it a cultural challenge. I think when we started 30 years ago as a worker co-op, I think the founders quickly understood that we don't come by cooperativism quite so easily here in North America as in some other parts of the world. Certainly, we created a co-op in being inspired by the producer co-ops of Latin America. And there certainly is a much more cooperative culture in that part of the world than here. There's much more of an individual approach here. And we grow up in a business world of kind of corporate decision making, a focus and an emphasis on quick decision making, kind of plowing ahead, growth, those sorts of things. And when you're running a business that's like ourselves, where we're competing with businesses that act that way, there is a sense of pressure, to structure in a very hierarchical way, have people making the big decisions and really moving as quickly as possible. And the reality is that, it's a democratically organized decision-making structure we have here. And so there's a lot of learning and education and just kind of experiential work and relational work that is necessary. And that's why I think, like Kristen was saying, the purpose of the organization is so critical, because you have to have something to rally around as a common purpose. But as we see in particularly in our society today, these divisions, in different value sets and things like this can be, when one is really stuck to their own value set and not able to either compromise or, collaborate, which is an even better way of kind of building win-win-win scenarios. It can be difficult. And so I find that to be one of the more challenging sides of it, but we found that, that's where the training and the experiential learning and, culture development in and around the idea of relationship, safe relationship is really important. So yeah, I just would add that piece to what Kristen had said.
So the importance of the values around cooperation, collaboration, etc., as opposed to competition, dog eat dog, sort of the usual corporate business model. And really getting everybody in a co-op to understand that. Is that the idea? Angela, do you have any thoughts? You've got a much older cooperative there, a lot of members. Tell us about the educational process there.
I think through time, people have become more educated across the board. When our co-op was formed, there was a common need. The business owners had the fishers at their mercy. They didn't have the capital in order to invest in their own boats and their own equipment. And then at the end of the day, the fishers, they lived during the winter months on the account they were given by the buyer. So they were always in debt. And they had no say. They didn't see how their product was doing whenever it was marketed in Boston or wherever it went. So they had a common need. They got together, they talked, they wanted to do better. They didn't want to always be living on the generosity of a company-owned store. So they formed the co-op then, and with the financing assistance of a local lawyer, they were able to get into the lobster processing industry and become more independent. And through time, they got a profit, and they became more educated as more of the partners. They had to have 9 people on the board. So that growth, that continued education and development, that's what formed the need for a local consumer co-op. So you have the Tignish Co-op store, and then the credit union, and a Tignish Co-op health center, and a Tignish seniors co-op. Through time, it was easier to form those co-ops because you had the help of your sister co-op.
Yeah.
Personally, I haven't really been involved in the startup of a co-op other than we've participated in the CETA program. So we did participate in that, and it's all about the common need. But times have changed. But getting funding and financing for co-op, that's probably one of the issues that hasn't changed.
That's actually one of the nuts and bolts I want to get into, Angela. And I want to recognize David Doughton with PEI Co-op Councils on the line. So you guys, I'm sure, know each other quite well. And he's, I'm sure, quite familiar with the story around Tignish. Fascinating story. I can sense that there's over time built a very deep level of trust and confidence in what co-ops are and what they can do for the community, just with that track record. And we do have Matthew. Thank you for joining us. I see you're thinking about starting a worker co-op pub in Dartmouth. So we're hoping that, feel free to throw some questions out at everybody, get them in the chat box there, and, we'll hopefully
It's
can
just
help.
but I just wanted to quickly just note, like Angela's story there. I mean, that's a community that's building a culture of cooperativism. So it's kind of interesting in that there is a culture of that developing there, and so it helps create and establish more co-ops and more ways of thinking that way for different functions within the community, it's a pretty rare thing, that, at least as far as I can tell in the area. There are some little spots like that, but there's not a lot.
Yeah, no, we could certainly use more of them where, it's the top of mind, kind of the go-to business model at some point in that part, in that community, which is fantastic. But a little bit about the nuts and bolts. I think, Angela, you had mentioned getting financing for co-op, whether it's debt or equity investment. If the 3 of you, any of you have some thoughts on what are the advantages or disadvantages of being a co-op when you go to a bank, you go to a credit union, or even your members to get additional financing. What could be some of the, I guess, the pitfalls maybe of being a co-op?
Well, we all know on our financial statement that members' equity is considered to be a liability. So you can't use that to go to a bank or
Yeah.
even to a credit union because they have to depend on the same, being able to offer the same interest rates as banks do to be successful themselves.
Yeah.
So you have to be resourceful and you have to rely on your members and on what you're producing to generate the profit that you need to leave in your company. And
Mhm.
leaving that equity in your company is very important. And for us, I guess over the years, our board and our membership have learned that they have to do that, even in tough times. You have to do that in order to build for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I think it's that loyalty and responsibility and respect that can make a co-op strong. But there are always hard times in a co-op.
Yeah.
But that's when the strength and the toughness is seen at its best through hard times, really.
Yeah. I think of the old saying that cash flow is king, and that you really
Yes.
gotta make sure you got a strong bank balance regardless of tough times, good times. But even with that, in good times, are there profit sharing mechanisms in co-ops? Anybody want to jump in on what would be your co-op or co-ops that you know about, at least the business oriented ones, if there's profit sharing and how that would happen?
Maybe Joey could take that, but I was gonna riff off of your original question after Robert, but about the profit sharing, I think Joey could maybe speak to that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and on that too, like we have an interesting story of not being able to get financing from credit unions as a co-op because we were cooperatively structured. So there can be challenges as a co-op, but I think Kristen will probably have more to say on some of those bits and pieces. As far as profit sharing, like what Angela said, we are for profit. Often people think that co-ops are just not for profits. I find this often people just assume that you must be a not for profit because you're a co-op. The reality is often you better be a for-profit co-op, otherwise you're not really going to have the ability to sustain and maintain your co-op long term. So we are definitely we talk about it as surplus more than we talk about it as profit, but basically it's the same thing. And when we have surplus at the end of the year, we do have a model. This is decided by the members because capital decisions are always decided by the worker members in our co-op, and that's pretty typical for most co-ops that are dealing with with profits and things. But for us, in a profitable year, we would take 20% of those profits and they go towards retirement savings for worker members. So at this point, that the practice is to put them into RSPs. We basically buy shares in the co-op with them, and those shares are managed by an arm of this Canadian Worker Co-op Federation. And that's part of retirement planning for our members. It's member money. It stays in the business, but obviously, if a member decides to move on, that could be transferred out of the co-op without trouble. There's also another 10% because the value chain is so critical for us, and without producers growing coffee successfully, we wouldn't have a business. 10% of our profits are shared back with producer partners in their cooperatives, typically for project work that they're working on. It's typically used, decisions are made by the co-op as to how they'll use those funds when we have them. And then finally, there's about 5% that gets distributed amongst all workers, basically based off of hours worked. We're a worker co-op, so we value like labor is the key factor that we're considering in everything we do, not so much capital. So it doesn't matter how many shares you've purchased in our co-op, it's how many hours you've worked. dictates. The rest of the 5% profit sharing gets put out as cash, almost as a bit of a bonus at the end of the year, kind of a holiday time bonus that gets put out. And so that makes up roughly 35% of our profits, although 20%, that first 20% that goes to retirement savings for members is actually still in the business. And then the remaining 65% of our profits would be reinvested in our business, because it's not easy to get funds from banks to borrow like it might be in other organizations. Although as we become established, that's been less of an issue, quite frankly. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's my part. Thanks.
Hey, interesting. It's great to hear that some of your surplus goes back into the supply chain to help support your suppliers. I'm sure they appreciate that greatly. Kristen, you had to scroll back to the financing piece. You had some thoughts there you wanted to.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know in case they are unfamiliar with kind of the difference between a nonprofit co-op, or otherwise sometimes use the word community service, and any for-profit co-op models, which can vary. But the main difference is not that they're generating any surplus, it's actually how they're reinvesting it and how they're giving it out back to members through mechanisms such as patronage, dividends, or interest on their shares. So in a for-profit model, you're allowed to do that. Not that you are doing it or have to, but you're allowed to do it. And in the nonprofit model, you are absolutely not allowed to do that. But you are able to generate surplus. And I'm sure people who are just in general in the nonprofit sphere are familiar with this. It's like, we need to think more about revenue generating activities and revenue diversification to pull away from grants and government and stuff like that. But I just wanted to be clear about that, because I do think that even within the co-op sector, there's a misunderstanding about that. And maybe that's where things lead to. But all in all, co-ops are community-based organizations. We are social purpose organizations. Whether or not we're giving, money back to our members, it's theirs, in my opinion, because if they're getting it back, then maybe the co-op was charging too much or something, so they're getting it back at the end of the year. The co-op is doing well they're an owner in it. So there's all sorts of kind of perspectives on what that means when they get back a dividend or whatever you want to call it. And anyways, just to also make the point that a lot of funders and lenders out there just simply don't understand what a co-op is at all. Like, I literally just got an email this morning of a funder, because we were asking, are co-ops eligible? And they said, if the co-op is registered as a charity or a nonprofit, then they can be eligible. And we were like, okay, but they can't. Okay, they could apply for charitable status, but that's kind of a different thing than an incorporated, what you're registered as, right? And then they're saying, but if you're also registered as a nonprofit, well, you can't be incorporated under two different acts. So now we're having to go back and educate them, like, listen, like, there's a statute in the co-op statute, there's a section about community service co-ops, and you have to take a look at this and see if it meets your criteria of nonprofit. And if it does, there's no reason why you shouldn't be accepting applications from nonprofits. From co-ops that are nonprofits. So yeah, you know what I'm saying? It can kind of get tangly. And what we always say is, like, we have our definition, and there's 1,000 million definitions out there about what other organizations define as nonprofit. And it's just education, because a lot of the time it can be easily resolved, and sometimes it's like fighting. But
there's still a huge amount of education that needs to go. Sounds like.
But like I said, at the end of the day, co-ops are social purpose. So in my opinion, it shouldn't matter like how the funding is going out, is kind of my argument.
Yeah. I do want to welcome Leslie. Hello, glad you could join us with the Canadian Worker Cooperative Federation. And thank you for letting us know. This is this is the International Year of Cooperatives. So there you go. I do want to pick up on a theme that we've been talking here, and I'm going to do a little bit of a riff about it. This relates to what we do at Center for Local Prosperity. There's been a consistent theme of local ownership, embedded in the community, local business and economic activity with cooperatives. That's one of their unique natures. And that's a lot of the work that we've been doing is how do you help educate and build more local economic structures within communities where there's local investment, the economic activity stays locally and so on. You know, as an example, by contrast, we've done some studies across Atlantic Canada where up to 45% of the economic activity leaks away outside of the region. And when you take that apart, why is that? It's because you've got a lot of corporate interests. The head office is somewhere else. And then all of that profit literally gets sucked out of the region. So that's really kind of what we're up against. And how do you begin to plug the leaks in the leaky bucket, so to speak, and really capture that wealth and get it to work locally within the community? So this is one, I think, very, very powerful tool, having that cooperative business model. Nevertheless, I did want to ask a bit more about competing with corporations. And what is that like? And I think the three of you probably have some experience with that. You know, I would imagine even Angela on the island, you've got some international interests that you're up against, and same in the coffee world, I'm sure. And Angela and Kristen, you probably have some thoughts about that as well. So any thoughts about how cooperatives can compete in a corporate environment? Feel free to jump in.
Maybe you want to go first? I'll say a little bit on it. I mean, I think it's challenging. I think corporations have access to capital much more readily, frequently than co-ops. And I think the lack of knowledge or interest amongst community members around co-ops, not necessarily interest, but just probably knowledge of them, you know, doesn't really allow for any competitive advantage as a co-op. You know, I think we try to market a little, like we try to talk to people a little bit about the fact that we're a Canadian-owned worker co-op or a Nova Scotia co-op. We have tried to do so more in the past number of years, but you know, I was talking before we started the webinar here today, even like, you know, this recent kind of Buy Canada, you know, newfound pride in being Canadian has certainly affected our sales. And I think there will be some detrimental impacts on, you know, American corporations that are selling coffee as a result of that. But, you know, we've been talking about being Canadian, being a co-op for a number of years now, and that's not necessarily turned the dial on things. So, you know, I think there is a lack of knowledge of what co-ops are and why those are valuable and worth supporting. And generally, you know, we're not big. We don't get as big. We don't have as much capital to mobilize on certain things, and so it can be challenging. That being said, I think we are much more efficient with the funds that we do generate in our business. And I think the work we create and the collective ownership model that we support here has lots of you know, I think benefits community-wise, and those people who are aware of that, I think maybe are more interested in buying from our co-op as a result of that. But it's a tricky environment to kind of compete in. You know, coffee is super competitive, low barrier to entry. There's lots of local co-ops or local coffee companies these days opening up, and we're kind of the opinion that if you're local, then we want to support it. You know, you choose the coffee that's being roasted in your community, and that's great. And we often even try to just connect with people who are doing that to sell them green coffee so that the producer partners we're buying from can sell more of it. It's a way of kind of generating more business for them. But it's a pretty competitive landscape for us. So it's really hard to get our heads above the Tim Hortons and the McDonald's and the Starbucks of the world when they're operating the way that they do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it seems like you've been doing a great job so far. Angela, Kristen, any thoughts on kind of the competitive landscape, so to speak?
Yeah,
I guess I could, go ahead, Kristen, go ahead.
sorry. No, I was just gonna say, I think we need to be careful thinking about competing with the traditional corporate world. I do think that's sometimes where things go really wrong is when co-ops are trying to change who they are in order to compete, because I don't think it's a fair, like, I don't think it's a fair like level anyways, if you know what I'm saying. I feel like they're trying to do such different things for different communities, and have a completely different set of values and principles and foundation. And so I think that I just would caution any co-op out there who is saying, well, we're losing business because X, and we don't know what to do, and we're trying to create a strategic plan to, figure out what we're going to do next. I would always be very, very clear, like whatever strategies and actions you're going to take, make sure that it is informed by your community of people, always informed by your members and the people that would be impacted by any decision you make, and always informed by the values and foundation in the beginning. I hope that makes sense, because I do understand, we do have a competitive economy, but I think where we thrive is where corporations fail. And so just filling in where those gaps are, because there are gaps as big and monstrous and intimidating as they may seem, to like a small, budding co-op. I think small co-ops actually can thrive even greater. It can focus on the community that they're in and giving great service, great values to those folks. And that's a successful co-op. You don't need to be so big to be a success. Do you know what I'm saying? I hope
Yeah,
that makes sense.
it's like the community support provides the edge, right there. Yeah, which of course corporations wouldn't really have. Liv, how about the chat box? How are we doing with questions there?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions. I can start with Matthew's question, which was whether there's a push to get some or some more cooperative education into grade school curriculum. That's a great question.
Any of the three of you have any thoughts about that?
Actually, it's an interesting question, because this year we're celebrating our 100th anniversary, Tignish Fisheries Co-op. And one of the items that was brought up at our how are we going to celebrate meetings was someone is going to a request to go into the schools and talk about Tignish Fisheries Co-op and talk about how it was founded and the importance of co-ops. But we don't have it all structured yet. But we are one of the co-ops that a lot of schools visit, and representatives from schools, especially sports teams from across the country, they'll come to BEI and they'll visit us and they'll do a tour, and our manager talks to them, and they usually have a lobster sandwich and they all leave happy. So I think it would be great to have something about co-ops in our school system. It really would be.
Start that educational process early, that cultural.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I brought that question up, sorry to jump in, just because
Okay.
I've heard of co-ops before, but just kind of, as Kristen was saying, like it was not for profit. Like I had sat on a board before, but never really considered what co-ops could look like on a grander scale until I was 39 years old. So like it just feels like there's a I think Kristen put it in the chat that it's very ad hoc and one-on-one and personal, and that's obviously what we're doing here a bit, but
Yeah.
maybe we could all aim higher.
And even in business schools at university level, post grad, like I mean, we have the St. Mary's University program, which is a big deal, and there are places around the world where it exists. But if you take a business course at university, there's a slim chance, you're going to necessarily hear about co-ops as a model for structuring a business off of.
Yeah. Liv, how we doing in the chat box?
So Wendy had a question. Wendy was wondering, she's interested to know how we see, or how the panelists see co-ops partnering with local food banks and with Food Banks Canada in particular.
Any thoughts on that one?
What was the question again?
Wendy's wondering, she's interested to know if you see co-ops partnering with food banks, and or Food Banks Canada in particular.
That's a great question. I don't really have a response. I know as far as there's some food hub development that's been of interest to us over the past few years. I think there's opportunities there. As far as food banks, donating product, like from our perspective, I think that's certainly something that would meet our criteria for kind of community engagement and community support, if there was something happening more locally. But I don't know of any kind of more structural component of that within co-ops generally. But I don't know a whole lot on the general sense of things anyway.
It sounds like Kelly has something that she might be able to Kelly, if you'd like to share about what Wolfville Farmers Market's doing, I bet everybody would love to hear about that. Not to put you on the spot at all, I can definitely read it out. Oh, you're muted, Kelly, if you'd like to speak to that.
I don't know about co-op connection between food banks and food hubs. I think the Wolfville Farmers Market kind of works more in the sense of sphere of partnerships with whatever and whomever is existing in the community space around food. So I think we're more out to look at our own co-op and see how we can leverage that to add value to our value, to elevate our values in the food security to food sovereignty spectrum. And so sometimes that means partnering with food banks, and sometimes that means partnering with the Front Street Oven. Sometimes it means partnering with the university, or certainly we're a co-op within a farmers market, a Nova Scotia sector co-op. We have a kitchen, so we are always looking for, we're partnering with the town who's putting on a soup and sides event for a barrier-free meal at the market. And anytime we look at doing food security type work, we always tie that to food sovereignty. So we're always saying, food security isn't just about getting food in people's mouths, and it's not just on the access side, but it's also on where it's sourced, and making sure that we're thinking of our local farmers in the delivery of barrier-free food as well. I don't really know if I'm answering that question, so but that's kind of our approach.
Thanks, Kelly.
Just for us, it's more about the local food bank. Like a couple of times during the year, we always have a box out, and then we give to the local food bank. And at our Christmas party, we encourage people, they bring food in and they get tickets for prizes. So it's more that level than the it's more the local level than the broader spectrum, but I don't know that in our industry with lobster that I don't really see that going to the food bank because it's anyway, it's more the one-on-one at the local level to the food bank. And then there's always I don't know on PEI if they have it in other provinces, but they have a Fill the Bus campaign on PEI where
Yeah.
this big school bus goes in the parking lot at the co-op store, and then we go up and fill try to fill it, our workers and our fishers, and then they go from community to community. On the island, there's a lot of support for that. And the turkey drive at Christmas and whatever.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate hearing your views on that. And a filibust, that is something that a couple of the other provinces are doing as well. And it's a great initiative. And thanks for putting some things in the chat. That's really helpful because what I'm trying to get my head around is I work for Food Banks Canada. I'm trying to build partnerships with agriculture, fisheries, and food industry for donation and for sustainment. And I was wondering, if you see the co-ops becoming one of those strategic kind of partners, because you have the ear of the industry, you know your local communities, and if we could tap into co-ops, I could see, maybe not lobster, it's a very high value commodity, and you're probably not going to donate spare lobsters. But if you were, say an apple cooperative, and you have a lot of smaller growers, together they could become a significant donor through their co-op, more so than perhaps what they could do as individual producers. But you've given me some great ideas and thoughts. And if there's anything that you would like to, chat about another time, love to hear your views.
And
Thank you.
Wendy, I want to throw a thought out there. We're talking about giving birth to co-ops based around necessity, mother of invention type of thing. And it would be fascinating if you come across an example of food bank clients that have pulled together and created a community garden. So that
we have some of those that are very successful,
Yeah.
actually, in New Brunswick, and I believe Nova Scotia has as well.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that begins to take people off of the dependency of a food bank and build their own.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we have one next to the priest house in Tignish.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that
Excellent.
could be a powerful force going forward.
Yeah, agreed.
Gardening co-ops could be a big one, I think. The
Thank you.
chat box, there's a lot of good information in there, and I'm trusting people should know how to save the chat box before we end this. I think what you do is, you click on the three little dots up in the upper right corner, and it says save chat. So a lot of good links in there. Thank you, Andy, for putting in some of those, and other people as well. Some really good background information. So any final thoughts? I want to put it back to we've only got 5 minutes here. Kristen, Joey, Angela, any last thoughts about maybe the future of your cooperative efforts, where you see things heading from here?
This has been really interesting. I really appreciate this opportunity, and it's been a good conversation. Just to kind of leave it at, we definitely need to be thinking differently about how we organize businesses and organize even nonprofits, because I really do think that putting decision-making power in the hands of people who are the end users or the end beneficiaries is where we need to go, because we can't keep going like we're going. And I think that that is the future, and I see that happening on a micro level in our province, but globally we see it transforming societies and entire countries too. So it can be very powerful, and I just hope that you'll take away from this conversation today, that we can have local prosperity, and it begins with putting power in the hands of the people.
There we go. Power with the people. Okay. Angela, Joey, any last thoughts?
Well, I see us
ahead,
here
Angela.
in 100 years. I might not see it myself, but I see us here, and it's all about the people. Like Kristen said, that's where the power is, in the people. And if you have loyal people with a common need, and they want to have control of what happens to what they're producing, it'll stay. Thanks for this opportunity today.
That's fantastic. Okay. Joey, anything?
Yeah, I would just say, Bob, I think I often say this, but we talk a lot of, and we have quite a lot of pride in our democracy, quote unquote, here in Canada, and certainly in the West, generally, we talk a lot about democracy, but, it kind of boils down to, an election once every certain number of years. And I think what the co-op structure is an opportunity for is living democracy in a more everyday way. And I think what it allows for, if we were to have more of them, is stronger knowledge of what having a real relationship is, what living in relationship with one another looks like, and frankly would probably do our society a lot of good as far as what we should be expecting from our quote unquote democracy, and how how those things pan out these days, because it looks like it's a team trying to win a game and then they get to make all the decisions. And it's a really funny way of looking at democracy in my mind, having spent the last 15 years in a worker co-op. That's really not how we think about democracy. And so it's, it proves to be a great way for us as a collective of people from many different walks of life, trying to live and work together in a sense, and understand what it means to really build a relationship with people that, we don't necessarily share all of our individual values with all the time, and still manage to make collective decisions together. So I think a great model to work from in our communities generally. Thanks.
Love that daily democracy with cooperatives. That's great. Just real quick here, just before we close out, I want to flag for you the upcoming webinars. On June 26th, on a Thursday, we're going to be talking about local energy. We've got a great slate of people coming for that one. We've got Greg Gaudet, Summerside Electric, Glenn Fillmore, St. John Energy, Dylan Hyde with Mahone Bay, and Ray Robertson, who represents an area wind consortium. All four of them are members of the Maritime Municipal Electrical Utilities Alliance. It's all about local energy. So that's going to be a good one. Then July 31st, we're going to have one on housing. Big subject these days, getting bigger all the time. Cooperative housing, again, that fits into that basket. And we're going to be exploring that one as well. So stay tuned, get on our mailing list, go to the website. You'll get newsletters on all of this stuff. And we're going to be doing this once a month. So I want to thank Angela, Kristen, Joey. This has been fantastic conversation. Greatly appreciate your time and energy. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have
Thanks,
a good
everybody.
one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks.